All right, everybody, I'm gonna finish up a couple pointers on the shoulder glenohumeral joint, and then we're gonna move on to my favorite articulation to teach, which is the radial ulnar joint. Love the radial. So last class, I had a student on the right side. I forgot who it was, or they're here today, but if it was you, love this question. And I gave it more thought on how I could better explain it. I kind of dismissed it as not dismiss the question, but I think I could have done a better job to explain it because after I ponder your questions, I think of them after, and I'm like, oh, I think I didn't understand exactly what they were asking. And I was like, that's a really cool question. And so the question, I use Kendall sometimes as a prop, but obviously Kendall is not anatomically correct to a humerus. It's just meant to be an example to help us see certain things. And so what the student was asking, I think, which was really brilliant, it's like, okay, if Kendall is here, I think I had his head pointing forward. If Kendall is here and we can flex and Kendall stays articulated face to face, but we talked about if you abduct, you have to externally rotate. So the student's question was, well, if Kendall is here, wouldn't you have to internally rotate if you adduct? Because then Kendall's head would be articulated. So I missed that part. And so I think I dismissed it as, well, it's an example, an analogy. So I was like, oh, no, I owe it a legitimate explanation. So that was true. Kendall's just an example. He's not articulated perfectly. But what a great question. So we look at the humerus, and the humerus isn't exactly a straight line, right? We kind of have this miniature neck. I know it's not like a neck like the fungal neck, but we also have these big tuberosities. And these tuberosities are formed from your rotator cuff muscles yanking on your bone. And you know, where muscle yanks on bone, there's going to be bone growth, you know, the Wolff's Law. And so these two tuberosities, infraspinatus teres minor yanking posteriorly, your subscapularis tugging anteriorly, and it forms this little bicipital. Okay. Well, these two big notches also get in the way of abduction because you got bone smacking up against bone. So it's not just keeping smooth on smooth, it's also preventing these tuberosities from smacking up against your acromion. Now, the head of the humerus is its surface area goes a lot further side to side than Kendall's face. So what I want you to notice is that smooth on smooth literally goes like to ear. So in other words, what's really happening is Ken's head, I think I had it right the first time. Ken's head is really facing here, and his body is facing forward. And the line right here, the anterior part, this is what represents your bicep. So in other words, when I would externally rotate, this would be facing out. But if you notice, there's still articulation facing in. That means something. So watch. Bicep is facing in, smooth on smooth, no problem. But when I externally rotate, I still have smooth touching on smooth. It might be the back of the ear, but I still have smooth facing on smooth. So when I go up, now remember the scapula is going to lean, and that's part of that lean. But really what I'm doing when I go up is I'm literally just going over the top of the head of the humerus to keep smooth on smooth when I go up here. And also I don't have to worry about those tuberosities smacking up against the acromion. So when you externally rotate, it's not like you're going all the way to the back. When you externally rotate, you're about here. So the biceps facing out, and you still have articulating surface so that when you go up, it stays smooth on smooth. And again, I can't move the scapula because it's drilled in here, but the scapula leaning and repositioning is also going to help get that up there. So once you go up like this, you can just adduct and be externally rotated because the head is not lined up straight with the humerus. You see, in fact, it's slightly posterior, some of that angle too. So it's not like it's lined up straight. Such a great question. I missed the nuance of that question. It's awesome. All right, radio on the joint. First of all, any follow-ups to that? I think we covered all of our shoulder bases and scapula bases. I love the radial ulnar joint. So the radial ulnar joint, I think, is, I want to say by far, but it's the most underappreciated joint to our function. Function meaning our hands are pretty special to what we do as humans. Sport, activity, occupation. Pretty cool. And I try to keep things simple. We have a functional bubble. I evolved it into a circle, but if you think about it, if you stand in one place, you have a bubble of function that your hands can go, and your hands can get in any three-dimensional point in that bubble. And one of the reasons is because you have all these different joints that can reposition your hand, and one of the all-stars of that is your radial ulnar joint. I mean, being allowed to work fingers up or fingers down without having to move big bones is pretty incredible. Okay. You guys have been introduced to radial ulnar joint as soup bowls. I'm going to tell you that we're not going to learn it like that because there's exceptions to the soup bowl thing. But the key thing with the radial ulnar joint is that it gets misinterpreted twofold. The radial ulnar joint is literally the radius of your forearm, wrapping and unwrapping about your ulna. In just as a summary of what's happening here. Now, the radius has proximal attachment, which is the ulna, the proximal ulna, but it also lives on the distal humerus. So radial ulna is in the same balloon, in the same capsule, in the same water balloon as the elbow joint. So a lot of times it gets confused for elbow joint because it lives in the same compartment. We had this analogy or this example when we're talking about the ankle and subtalar joint. Two different joints live in the same apartment complex, easy to get confused. So the elbow and the radial ulnar joint get confused because they live in the same apartment complex. This is elbow, a uniaxial hinge, and this is radial ulna, a uniaxial pivot. Pivot is the layman's terms. Trochoid is the Latin term, but I'm just going to hold you guys to pivot. It's a merry-go-round, meaning it's a uniaxial, but instead of a hinge, which is general motion, you know, if you go to push that door open, there's rotation and translation, the center of mass of the door. The pivot joint or the merry-go-round is like a revolving door, like a merry-go-round where it's more pure rotation. Does that make sense? So this motion, this uniaxial motion is more like a merry-go-round compared to this uniaxial motion, which is more like a hinge. You see the difference? It goes back to, I can have 50-pound dumbbells. I'm not doing this, but I can sure as heck do this. It's a big difference. When it's pure rotation, there's no linear work to be done. The second confusion of the radial ulnar joint is distally. People will confuse the radial ulnar joint as wrist motion. The wrist joint, as I'm going to teach you guys probably Friday, is here, and it's a biaxial, what we call an ellipsoid. And just to show you that the wrist, you remember my little rhyme? Grace, the wrist doesn't, you remember that, right? The wrist doesn't twist. The wrist doesn't twist. I need to start a children's anatomical kinesiology, right? But the wrist doesn't twist. And you're like, dude, yeah, it does. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. If you splint your forearm, in other words, don't let your forearm move, and you try to rotate your wrist, it's not going anywhere. Give it a try. Try to spin your wrist passively without moving your forearm. Your wrist isn't going anywhere. Now, once you move your forearm, but if this was wrist, I wouldn't feel or see movement in my forearm. Does that make sense? I would just see motion here. In fact, if your wrist could twist, think about it for a second. In anatomical position, your thumb is lateral, right? Comme ça. If my wrist twisted, my thumb would twist and go to the medial part of my arm without moving my forearm. In other words, that would just happen with the corporal walls. I think you guys understand what I'm saying. Do y'all realize how wired you are in your hand? Like the number of nerves and vessels for the dexterity, the fine motor programs, you are wired like you wouldn't believe here. You have a ton of wiring. In fact, at one point they called this surgical no man's land because they have so many wires, so many nerves to do all the intricate detailed things. You have to have a lot of nerves. So the last thing you want is for all of this plumbing to twist like a balloon animal. You don't want the wrist to twist because you have all of those nerves that are all tunneling in there, being wrapped and popped and twisted. So when we do this, it's important to understand this motion is not wrist motion. This motion is not elbow motion. It is specifically the radial ulnar joint. Bless you. And the proximal radial ulnar joint is literally the head of the radius. Look how round that is. The head of the radius. And the distal orbits the ulna. So the proximal head is spinning about the ulna, and the feet are orbiting the ulna. So you have your proximal radial ulna, you have your distal radial ulna. We're just going to call it the radial ulna to make it simple. We'll try to simplify. A couple analogies. Do you know my analogies? Anybody sleep, like you wake up in the same position you went to bed? I envy your sleep. I'm a mover and a shaker. I'm all over the place. So imagine Kendall laying on, let's say, the left side of the bed. And Kendall goes from being supine and wraps his feet over to the other side of the bed, but his head stays on the pillow. That could happen. So he went from being supine to being prone. His feet went from being on the left side of the bed along with his head, which is on the left side of the bed, but now his feet are on the right side of the bed. But his head stayed on the left side of it. I know y'all are thinking, Campbell, where the heck you going with this, dude? It's what happens in our radial ulnar joint. With our radial ulnar joint, we don't have lefts, rights, because this is a left side. We have lateral and medial sides of sides. So in anatomical position, the radius is sleeping on the lateral side on its back, because it's supine. And the act of going prone is keeping the head on the pillow, which is always going to be lateral, but bringing the body over to the medial side. Wrapping and unwrapping. Going prone, face down. Going supine, face forward or face up. Going prone, face down. Going supine, face up. That's what pronation and supination means. Just like in the foot. Going prone, going supine, going face down, going face up. Wrapping and unwrapping. When the radial ulnar joint is unwrapped, you are supine. Meaning, the head of the radius and the feet of the radius, styloids of the radius, they're both lateral. The whole radius is lateral. However, when you pronate, the head of the radius is still lateral, but the feet of the radius is now medial to your arm. Grace, do you remember what that rule was called? Thumb rule. Grace is like, I didn't need those tricks. I had it all. No excuse, Grace. Just putting Grace on the spot. So I have a rule that I've developed through years of teaching and understanding from students' perspective called the thumb rule. And like in, has anybody ever seen, was it Anchorman? I see Anchorman back in the day, old movie, Will Ferrell. 60% of the time it works every time. This is 100% of the time. It works 110% of the time. So this is what I want you to do. Look at your hand, anatomical position, and notice how your thumb, and it doesn't matter if it's your right or your left, it doesn't matter. Notice how your thumb is lateral. It's on the outside, okay? Because the wrist doesn't twist, when I move my radial ulnar joint, the thumb has to go along for the ride. If the wrist could twist, that wouldn't be the case. But because the wrist is splinted in the transverse plane, when I pronate, my thumb goes to the medial side of my arm. That means my radius is wrapped around my ulna. The head of the radius is still lateral, but the feet of the radius flopped over to the other side of the bed and is now medial. Obviously, the thumb is not part of the radius, but the thumb is attached to the radius and it can't deviate from it transversely. So the thumb is a great marker for the radius. When the thumb is lateral, I am supine. When the thumb is medial, I am fully prone. And I'm going to teach you what it means to be halfway. And there's no exceptions to this, unless you had a bad day, dislocation or something. Okay? So, how many of you have heard about the soup bowl, right? So let's do a scenario where this rule is going to help you figure stuff out. I think we don't have to stand up to do this. Let's go palms down. Okay. Palms down. And now let's extend our wrists and palms up. And let's pretend like you're a waiter or a waitress and you're working at a restaurant. So palm is up, fingers pointing back. Some people would say, oh, there's my suppo, I must be supinated. But you're not, you're pronated. And the way we prove it, a few reasons. One is, do the thumb rule. Oh, my thumb is medial. Another way is, radial ulnar joint has nothing to do with wrist. Radial ulnar joint has nothing to do with elbow. And the irony is, it just comes back to something we've been saying a long time. We don't want to use global landmarks. We don't want to use palm-facing ceiling, palm-facing floor. We don't want to use any of that stuff. We want to use local landmarks. We want to use bony landmarks. We want to use landmarks that make up the joints themselves. Okay. So the thumb rule will save you. The thumb rule is a great reference. So let's do some practice. Right radial ulnar joint pronation, supination, pronation, supination, pronation, supination, pronation, supination, pronation, supination, pronation, supination. So did my wrist movement affect my radioulnar joint? No, it's still wrapping and unwrapping. It might look different because my wrist flexed. You guys remember this question on your first test? Yeah, remember that one? Okay. Now let's do it with the radioulnar joint. I start here and I do this. Use the thumb rule. Where is my thumb when I start? Where is my thumb when I finish? And how did my thumb have to move to get there? If I go from being unwrapped to wrapped, I have to have pronation. And if I go from being wrapped to unwrapped, I have to have supination. Does everybody understand what I mean by wrapped and unwrapped? Literally, pronation is the act of going prone for the radius. And supination is the act of going supine for the radius. The radius goes prone when it wraps around the ulna. And it goes supine when it unwraps around it. Is my thumb lateral or medial? Lateral. You got it. Absolutely. And now it's medial. And the only way that can happen is if I had to have pronation. Right radial ulnar joint, pronation. Started here, finished here. You see it. It's hard to see. That's why we need these landmarks. That's why we need these landmarks to help us. Yes? All right, next question. One we've had before, but now we have radioulnar joint, so we can analyze it. I'm going to start here in anatomical position, and I'm going to bring my arms over my head. And I would like for you to assess shoulder joint, just frontal plane. So just give me the ab or the ad. Give me the scapular contribution to that ab or ad. And then analyze if there was any potential radioulnar joint motion. 3 things. Don't worry about the rotation of the shoulder. Just give me the ab or the ad. Give me the scapula, how it would contribute with my arms going up. And then give me the potential radioulnar joint motion. I'll do it again. Sorry. It does work for some people, but I tell you, it's not for all. Yeah. If you do think of any, I'm going to try to do some trigger ones, but if you think of any of those that I don't remember, feel free to shoot. Oh my gosh, thank goodness I remember to press record. I totally forgot if I did or not. It's one of those days. One of those days. Okay, guys, let's move on. It's a catch-22. I want to give you time, but also I want to give you a lot of examples. So shoulder would be abduction, frontal plane, lateral flexion, we call abduction. Getting me into fetal, just do a different road. Okay. Scapula is going to help me by upwardly rotating my scapula. I can, but what about elevation? For this class, I'm going to separate the elevation and depression when my arms aren't coming up. And then when the arms are going up, that's when I'm going to emphasize the upward and downward rotation for the purposes of this class. Okay. Did the radial ulnar joints move? Okay, let's do a test. I started off with my thumbs lateral, so I'm supine. I'm supinated because in anatomical position I can't go any further. Now watch this, you guys. Does my radial ulnar joints have anything to do with my shoulders? Is that the same position? Something had to happen. Let me try it this way. Good old Ken. If you see Ken's face here, and Ken rotates in the sagittal plane, you're not going to see Ken's face, aren't you? You're going to see Ken's back. If Ken was a spoon, you'd see the front of the spoon, but if I brought Ken up, you'd see the back of the spoon. If I'm here, you see my palms, but if I just flexed, you'd see the backs of my hands. So if I laterally flex or abduct, and I don't pronate or supinate, it makes sense you're going to see the back of my hands. So I actually pronate while I bring my arms up so that you can keep seeing the front of my hands. All right, everybody stand up. I want you to go slow. You are rotating so that you can keep your hands facing forward. I want you to go slow, and I want you to notice how your radial ulnar joint starts to rotate as you bring your arms up over your head, and how you're in position, how that radial ulnar joint is medial. Yes? No? Is that some Harry Potter wizardry? You feel it? Look, do this with me. Anatomical, flex. Notice, lateral, right? Okay, anatomical, laterally flex or abduct. Extend, you're not in the same position. So somewhere you had to pronate. Do we agree? What I need you to understand, or at least to see if it helps you, is remember our shoulder, when we're going up, has to do this. So our radial ulnar joint is going to do this in order to keep hands facing forward. Because if we didn't, we'd see the back of our hand. One more time. One more time. This time, God, the human body's so cool. This time I want you to purposefully try to stay supinated. Try to keep those thumbs lateral. Keep those thumbs lateral. Keep those thumbs lateral. Notice them, see the back of your hand. So once you're up here, do this. So instead of doing 1, 2, you're gradually doing it all the way up in order to keep your hands facing forward. Does that make more sense? Sorry, have a seat. That is an example of, it looks like it's not moving, but it did. It looks like it's not moving, but it did. The thumb rule is going to save you guys. The thumb rule is going to be a very good tool to use for radial ulnar joint motion, especially during these illusions. All right, let's do an easier one. There's so many radial ulnar joint motion questions. You're driving, and let's say you are right hand under, left hand over. You're about ready to make a turn. Okay. Left hand on top, right hand on the bottom. And let's say you turn left. You're at Court Ranch. So don't worry about breaking traffic rules. Okay, left hand over, right hand under, and you're turning left. Talk to me about the radial on the joint motions that would have happened. Now remember, well, what about the shoulder? What about the elbow? This is just a radial on the joint conversation. We analyze joint by joint. I just want to have a radial on a conversation since that's the joint of the day. Left hand over, right hand under. You take a left at the cart ranch. Talk to me about radial on the joint motions. Maybe there's none. Maybe there's some. Use your thumb rule. Use your landmarks. You know, the radial on the joint is nothing different than we've done with landmarks in the past. We've used cervical landmarks. We use pelvic landmarks. We've used internal landmarks for all the ways I teach you joint motion. Radial on the joint is no different. We want to say the left did this, the right did that, if. So we want to communicate side, because we don't want to assume. We don't want to assume they did the same thing. Some of you might be able to see it right away. That's awesome. I just want right answers. I don't trust my eyes. I made way too many mistakes in my time. So I'm using landmarks. I'm using change in position, basic physics. Change in position is distance displacement, or joint displacement, change of joint position. Where did I start? My left radial on the joint is wrapped, and my right radial on the joint is unwrapped. And my left goes from being wrapped to being unwrapped. So I know that my left radial on the joint had to have supination. Basically, it did this and this. My right went from being unwrapped to being wrapped. So I know I had to have right radial on the joint pronation. So in essence, my right did this. All right, how about, so another good thing about landmarks, guys, is you don't have to have experience with any skill, sport, or activity. Human motion is human motion. Landmarks don't lie. So it doesn't matter that you've never played baseball. It doesn't matter that you've never swam. It doesn't matter that you, as a expert in human movement, and you are, an expert witness in court only has to have a knowledge base above the average person. You have a knowledge base of human movement above the average person. So let's do a baseball player, and they're swinging and they're right-handed. So let's play a play. Let's take note. Right. Sorry, my left. Right. I'm doing this for an example. Don't judge my swing. Yes. Oh. Okay. This is what I want you to do. Sorry. See it? Go. Also, I'm going to float around with this very expensive and brand new lightsaber. If anybody wants to mimic it, if you want to see it for yourself. What's that mean? Boink? Boink. There you go. Anybody else want it? You could use your pencil. You could use your pen. Use a rolled up piece of paper. Some schools, they have like all this fancy stuff, man. Fancy stuff. I mean, a broken lightsaber, a Ken doll. I'm making like a fossil skeleton. You know, learn a lot of stuff. Just remember, guys, we analyze it joint by joint, and we don't want to assume. I think this is a good example of why we don't want to assume. You know, the swing is coming from one side, but that doesn't mean the radiola joints have to do the same thing. That's a good example. The turn was a left-handed turn, but that doesn't mean the radiola joints had to do the same thing. Right? We don't want to assume. Left radioulnar joint supination. Right radioulnar joint pronation. I think at the same time. Cool. Okay. Next piece of the puzzle. Anatomical position we call supine. We have precedent with the knee, where the knee and the elbow in anatomical position, you can't go any further, right? You're at the end of the room. So there's other joints that you're at the end of the rope. Like the shoulder, I can have extension from anatomical, but the elbow, I can't have extension from anatomical because you're all the way at the end of your rope. So it's okay for those joints where the end of the road, you can't go any further. For my elbow in anatomical, we can also say it's extended because I can't have extension from anatomical. That would be hypo. The radioulnar joint in anatomical position is supinated. But that only means you can't go any further. You're all the way. You're in Florida on I-10 and you can't travel any further. You can only go west. So that is the reason. Anatomical, fully supine, fully prone, and we have a functional midway that we call semi-prone, a semi-pronated position. The reason I gave you that first spiel is to explain why we call this a semi-prone position and not a semi-supinated position, and that's because anatomical is supine, and to get there, you have to have pronation to get midway. If anatomical was here, we'd be calling this a semi-supinated position because you'd have to have supination to get midway. So does it make sense? Because we're supine to start, and because we have to have pronation to get halfway to Buc-ee's, you can hold it. It's only 200 more miles. Dang it, Buc-ee. You got me. That's why we call this a semi-prone position, because you have to pronate to get there. Make sense? Now, a semi-prone position, very functional. You think of things you can do in this semi-prone position. But there's landmarks. Landmarks, thumb rule. So when you're semi-prone, your thumb is going to be lined up with your bicep. Lateral, medial, midway. A good rule of thumb. If you're not quite sure if you're midway, because think about it, if I'm semi-prone, that means I can travel 90 degrees of supination and 90 degrees of pronation. Okay? So we're going to do an example of what I'm talking about. Everybody, one last time, stand up. I know. Hey, this is kinesiology. You should move a little bit. I got no smiles. Stop crashing. Hand over your heart. Okay. I want you to truly analyze. So we're kids, we're about to do the Pledge of Allegiance, but I want you to use those landmarks and say, am I fully supine? Am I fully prone? Or can I prove that I'm somewhere in the middle? Take some time, play around with your landmarks. You have three choices. Are you fully supine? Are you fully prone? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Be careful when you bring it back down, not to move it. Because sometimes you're like, okay, when I bring it down, my palm should be facing something, and you accidentally move it to fulfill what you want to happen anyway. Just be careful. Fully supine, fully prone, or semi-prone, somewhere in the middle. Okay, you can sit down. If I'm fully supine, that means I can't go any further. All the way. If I'm fully prone, that means I can't go any further. I'm all the way. But if I'm somewhere in the middle, that means I should be able to supinate and I should be able to pronate. So when I'm here, hey, radial ulnar joint, can you supinate? Yep. Hey, radial ulnar joint, can you pronate? Yep. So I'm midway. My thumb is lined up with my bicep. Here, let me show you this cool trick. Stay. Again, because I think it's a cool trick. Stay. Hand over your head. Y'all think I'm being silly, but I'm preparing you for a test. We're going to go from here to there. And you have to tell me what happened. Palm like you're patting yourself on the head. That's a good boy. You're a good girl. That's how I talk to my cats. It's so simple. The palm facing up. Palm down, the palm up. Tell me what happened. Y'all, seriously though, it's all fun and games until those cats bring a present to your front porch. And they're just like, huh? Huh? My gift? My rent? I'm like, that's a torpor. I usually call. Try and incorporate your thumb rule if you can. Try to incorporate your thumb rule when you can. It'll save you. Also, be careful. If your hand is here and you say, well, I'm going to bring it back down like Campbell keeps doing, be careful not to actually move the joint you're analyzing. So watch, this is really what's happening. That's your start. Was my thumb, when I start, lateral or medial? Lateral. Now my thumb is medial. I had right radial on the joint pronation when I did that. And where most students, not you guys, and not you guys that watch my video, time out, they're going to miss it. And I want you to know why, because that's going to make us better students. They're going to miss it because when I do this, they're going to say, ah, there's the supination. They're going to put supination. That's all they've ever been taught. We're good? All right, guys. Yeah, have a good day. I hope you learned something today.